嗨，欢迎来到果果的新闻频道。本期重要看点：战争还是和平？美国精英们正在疯狂鼓吹中美贸易战，但真相究竟如何？一位中国顶尖学者直接撕破西方谎言：核战争没有赢家，美国根本打不赢。他更爆出惊人内幕：若美国再次爆发金融危机，全世界只有一个国家能救他。想知道为什么中美注定必须和平共处？为什么说贸易战最终受伤的是美国老百姓？点开视频，听国际关系专家如何用颠覆性观点炸裂你的认知，请看前方发来的报道。
War is inevitable in the eyes of, those in DC, those on Wall Street, the financial elite, in America and around the world. Do you think that the United States is really an empire that will accept second or third place in terms of global power without putting up a fight?
First of all, as the late Dr. Henry Kissinger said, especially in the latter part of his life, especially in the last few years of his life, he said war is not and should not be an option between China and the United States. I cannot agree with his remark more. I really completely agree with what the late Dr. Henry Kissinger said. Let me tell you why. Because comparing China's conventional weapons with the U.S. conventional weapons, I think China and the United States are completely on a par with each other. Neither has predominance or dominance over the other in terms of the conventional weapons. As a matter of fact, I truly believe, on the other hand, that China has some great advantages in conventional weapons. So if we are engaged in a conventional war, nobody can really defeat the other without suffering mortal damages to itself. Now, in terms of nuclear warheads, of course, the United States has more nuclear warheads than China. How many warheads China has, nobody knows, because China keeps a top secret about that. While the United States claims that it has the capability to destroy the world more than 1,000 times if it uses all its warheads, China will never make that kind of statement. China's message is more subtle. China's message is, if any country imposes nuclear war on China, China will have enough nuclear warheads to wipe out the attacking country. That means China is absolutely certain it has the ability to wipe out its enemy if it plays around with the nuclear war against China with whatever that remains in its nuclear arsenal. That means the United States engaged in a conventional war against China will not win that war. The United States engaged in a nuclear war, God forbid, will not overwhelm China without being mutually destroyed by each other. That means a war between China and the United States will lead directly to Armageddon. In that sense, I completely disagree with that distinguished professor from Harvard who published a book called Destined for War, because he put forward this theory of the Thucydides trap and saying about rising power, challenging the dominant power, etc., eventually leading to war. Now, the professor, very renowned and highly respected by many quarters in the world, including in China, analyzed conventional wars and reached his conclusion. I think he did very solid scholarship work. However, he forgot to tell mankind and tell decision makers in Washington in particular that all the cases of war he analyzed were conventional wars. How can you use conclusions you derive by analyzing conventional war and try to apply your conclusion or the Thucydides trap theory to China and the United States, which are both very important nuclear powers? That leads me to reach my own conclusion about the inevitability of peace between China and the United States. Of course, China and the United States are different. We probably will remain different for eternity. China does not want to become another version of the United States, and the United States will never want to become another version of China. However, the difference between China and the United States should be our strength. It should be what will enrich us and mutually strengthen us, rather than what will pull us apart. So I hope the Americans, the Chinese, and people everywhere in the world will embrace my theory about the inevitability of peace. People in the United States always say there are two things inevitable. It is inevitable to die. Everyone will die, probably with Elon Musk as a potential exception. We don't know. And you need to pay tax. Otherwise, Uncle Sam will chase after you throughout the world to force you to pay tax. Victor Gao created the third inevitability. That is the inevitability of peace between China and the United States. I want to debate or argue with anyone in the world about war between China and the United States, which I completely disagree with. And I want to really convince them as much as I can about the inevitability of peace. The Chinese people, and I'm one of them, are not enemies of the United States or the American people. We have tremendous amount of goodwill towards the American people. And for me in particular, after spending 4 years in New Haven, Connecticut, and I was 1 year in the PhD program in the political science department in the graduate school of Yale University, and I spent 3 years at Yale Law School. Now, this was a highlight of my life for my personal self, for my family, and possibly for quite a few generations in my family to come. This is how I became very much indebted to the goodwill, to the friendliness of the American people, leading me to my firm conviction that the Chinese people and the American people are not enemies against each other. They are not out there to destroy each other. We can be friends. We can get along with each other. We can respect each other. We can deal with our differences in friendship, for example, through negotiations. And we do not want to be held hostage to the fantasy that war will break out. I'm always sickened by whoever in Washington talking about a war with China, because they don't know what they are talking about. They are talking about having the American people destroyed together with the Chinese people and the rest of mankind. Do you think that's responsibility by any general or admiral or government leaders or members of Congress in the United States for the American people, for the Chinese people, or for mankind at large? Let's talk about peace. Let's really become convicts of what I advocate. That is the inevitability of peace between China and the United States.
Well, I think that you're right, and I hope that you're right. When we had leaders like Kissinger, you were definitely right, because Kissinger was someone who made a great effort to understand not just China today, but Chinese civilization and the thousands of years that go along with that. China still does have great leaders who deeply understand America and its much younger civilization, whether it's Wang Huning, America versus America. I think that book in it of itself is one of the greatest, examples of a foreign leader having a great understanding of America and American culture. But in the United States today, you really don't have anyone that understands China, I don't think. And all they see is an adversary, a competitor, and one that needs to be taken out rather than competed with. When you look at the United States today, do you think that lack of education about China underscores their failed approach in this trade war that we've seen develop over the past several months?
Well, I think the United States, especially the United States under President Donald Trump, believes that it is the dominant power in the world and it is the unipole in the world. This is in contradiction to the international order established back in 1945, because if we look at the composition of the Security Council of the United Nations, with 5 permanent member states, each with a veto power, that means from the very beginning, the international order we are still living through is not meant to be unipolar. It was meant to be multipolar, involving 5 permanent member states, each with a veto power. Now, even though the Cold War ended around 1991, the United States, believing that it is the only surviving superpower in the world, being able to dominate above all the other countries, may be a distortion of the international order that was created in 1945. Now, China does not want to change the international order. as it is. China wants to modify and improve the international order we are living through. And I don't think the world today will ever go back to a unipolarity. The multipolarity is a fact. Whether the United States likes that or not, the United States will eventually need to accept that. Meaning, the United States need to deal with China as an equal partner in this world, rather than try to domineer above China, to issue ultimatum to hold a gun at China's head. China will not buy that story, and China will defend its sovereignty and territorial integrity. And in terms of the global tariff war and the anti-China tariff war that President Trump and his government have launched, I think what China is doing is to stepping up to defend free trade. Now, defending free trade is not only for China's own economic benefits, it is for the economic benefits of all the countries involved. And ironically, it is also for the benefit of the majority of the people in the United States. Because I really don't believe the majority of the people in the United States wants to pay the tariff charged by the government, because the tariffs are not going to be paid by China or by France or Japan, etc. No, the tariffs eventually will be paid by the American importers, which eventually will be allocated to the purchasers in department stores, in shops of all kinds. Eventually, it will be a tax against the American people. The tariffs themselves will not make America great again. It will not create wealth and riches among the people in the United States. Eventually, it will lead to inflation, higher cost, and it will degrade the living standards of the American people. So I think between China and the United States, let's be honest with each other. If the United States is serious about moving back manufacturing jobs to the United States, China is the best country to help. If the United States wants to build up connectivity, building up highways, railways, high-speed railways, new airports, new container ports of all kinds, new transmission grids of all kinds, or even increase its power generation capacities, China is the best country to help. So view China as a resource which can be utilized for the benefit of the American people. And if we can reach that agreement, Victor Gao, myself, will be probably one of the first to volunteer to promote China-US friendship and cooperation for our mutual benefit.
Mm-hmm. On the other hand, I think a lot of Americans, maybe they'd be content with the idea of the American system as it currently is imploding. They don't view it as being in line with the pragmatic tradition of our country, of which China has an even more pragmatic tradition, I think. I think that's why we should be such good friends, and we should work together because we have you guys are even more pragmatic than us. Do you think that, well, I'm not even going to ask you that because I know what you said. It was a viral clip that you had. You said that, Trump might be like the Gorbachev for the United States, that these reforms actually bring about the implosion of the system in a way. Do you think that's a possibility? And what do you think that would mean for America? Could America build into something better if that were to happen?
Well, first of all, I always hesitate to talk directly about what's happening in the United States, especially involving political matters, because I consider that to be completely an internal matter of the United States, and the American people have the say. I, Victor Gao, does not have any direct say about that. I can make comments and observations, of course. I can sometimes express my anxieties for the American people so that they can really pick up their acts together. But allow me to make one point. I think I'm really worried about the possibility of multiple crises building up upon each other, eventually leading to a major financial crisis in the United States in the coming 12 months or 18 months or 24 months, basically before the end of the Trump 2.0 presidency. Why do I say that? There will be huge amount of problems involving the equity market, the bond market, the treasury bond market, for example, is already kind of wobbling, and the US dollar positions and inflation problem and jobless problem eventually. So I think while the United States is engaged in revolution of one kind after another, and after President Trump's declaration of April the 2nd as the Liberation Day, I still do not know from whom the United States was liberated, from the Spanish or from the British or from the French. I really do not know. But be very careful when you launch revolutions, especially multiple revolutions. So my concern is that if you combine all these things together, eventually by the end of the day, when the dust does settle, you may be hit with a major financial crisis. God forbid. I hope it will never happen. However, if it does happen, let me assure you, there will be no other country which can save the United States except China. China did help save the United States in 2008 from the financial crisis. If you do not believe me, then read former Secretary of Treasury Hank Paulson's biography. He will tell you in great details how many times he called the leaders in China, how much he convinced China that China really need to pitch in to help from saving the United States from sinking deeper and deeper into the crisis. Now, the point I want to make is simple. If the United States will be hit again by another crisis, China will be the only country which will have the financial wherewithal and the capabilities and the manufacturing prowess to help saving the United States. That means from now till whenever that disaster happens, and I hope it will never happen, the US government and the decision makers in Washington, including members of the Congress, in the Senate, in the House of Representatives, should really care about incentivizing China to do the right thing if a major crisis hits the United States again, rather than, for example, alienating China, pushing China out of the window, writing off China, dismissing China, for example. Remember what happened between China and the United States in 2008 and how much China did to help save the United States. And always keep one option open for the possibility of another financial crisis hitting the United States. And when you look around, there is only one country which will be able to save the United States. And don't foreclose that possibility by alienating China and pushing China out of the window. China is a megatrend for the United States to recognize as well as to engage with for mutual benefit. And I'm one of the factors involved. I always advocate for peace and stability, goodwill, and camaraderie, for example, between China and the United States. And I do hope my vision of China-US relations eventually, in due course, will be a reality between China and the United States. To wrap up, allow me to make one final point. I can tell you from the bottom of my heart that the Chinese people are not enemies of the American people. And we want to get along with the American people in peace, in cooperation, in partnership. And I completely agree with President Trump when he said one sentence, that is, if China and the United States can agree with each other, there will be nothing in this world which we cannot overcome. And we will generate miracles for the Chinese people, for the American people, and for mankind as a whole. That should be a better world. And that should be a better relations between Washington and Beijing. And allow me to commit myself completely to make sure that China and the United States will always follow this inevitability of peace rather than being distracted towards the so-called fallacy, if I may use that word, of destined for war between China and the United States. Thank you very much.
精彩视频看完了，高志凯教授认为中美在常规武器实力上相当，甚至中国具有一定优势。核武器方面，中国虽数量不公开，但具备确保相互摧毁的能力，因此核战争没有赢家。批判修昔底德陷阱，高教授指出，该理论基于历史常规战争案例，不适用于核大国之间，忽略核威慑对战争冲动的抑制。经济相互依赖，高教授强调中美经济互补性，指出美国发动的贸易战实际损害美国民众利益，而中国是维护自由贸易的重要力量。历史与文化纽带， 高教授以个人留学经历为例，表达了对美国人民的友好感情，强调两国人民非敌人，应通过合作化解分歧，危机中的合作可能。高教授提醒，美国若未来发生金融危机，中国仍是唯一有能力并愿意援助美国的国家，因此不应疏远中国。整体上，高志凯以强烈的情感与理性论证结合，呼吁中美摒弃对抗思维，走向必然的和平共处之路。其立场鲜明，体现了一种理想主义与现实主义交织的外交视野，但也隐含了对美国政策短视与缺乏中国了解的批评。谢谢大家观看，喜欢请点赞、评论加订阅，你的支持是我最大的动力。比心，明天见，拜拜。